At 09:56, a Ukrainian MiG-29 was tearing through the sky, climbing past 1,000 feet toward Ork. The mission was clear: destroy a Russian ammunition depot. For 12 minutes, everything had been quiet, almost routine. But the pilot had no idea that 120 kilometers away, a Russian S-400 system had just locked its radar onto him. Suddenly, a steady tone echoed in the pilot's headset. Sharp, cold like a punch to the stomach. A missile had already been launched. 180 kilometers of bad news climbing at over Mach 2 in the very first second of flight. At that distance, between 80 and 90 seconds until impact, if he was lucky. The pilot jerked the stick hard to the right while simultaneously deploying chaff, putting the MiG into a 90-degree angle relative to the radar beam, what pilots called notching. He held the perpendicular course for 8 seconds while releasing chaff in programmed bursts. The strips of aluminum created a slowly expanding cloud drifting with the wind, each reflecting radar energy like thousands of tiny mirrors that made a single aircraft look like 100. The system's algorithms tried to distinguish the fighter from false ground returns, but at that angle, everything looked identical. The track quality degraded from solid to intermittent to lost. The 48N6 missile, without guidance updates, switched to backup mode, flying toward the last predicted intercept point. But the pilot had already changed course and was diving toward the ground. The missile seeker activated in its terminal phase, searching for a target now 2 kilometers away and obscured by chaff. Its proximity fuse found nothing but a rain of aluminum. The warhead detonated harmlessly, scattering shrapnel through empty sky. The reason this worked is simple. The S-400's radar uses Doppler processing to separate moving targets from ground clutter by measuring approach or departure through frequency shift. But when you fly perpendicular to the radar, your relative velocity becomes zero. To the Doppler processor, you turn into terrain, and that's why the missile missed. The pilot leveled at 500 feet, checking his 6. The missile's smoke trail faded into the morning air, but he knew that was only the first round. The Russian gravestone radar uses thousands of transmit-receive modules capable of electronically jumping its beam from the horizon to the zenith instantly. Unlike older systems that gave up after losing lock, this one remembered last position, heading, speed, and started looking for where you were likely to be. The pilot had gained maybe 30 seconds, but the gravestone operators were already adapting, switching to different radar modes. That's when they activated the bistatic mode, turning the pilot's clever escape into a trap. In bistatic mode, the radar splits in two. The transmitter stays near Melitopol, while the receiver is 40 kilometers away, like a flashlight in one corner and eyes in another, revealing shadows and reflections invisible before. The MiG's radar warning: receiver detected only the transmitter, and didn't know another. Receiver was capturing its reflection. The geometry allowed the reflected signal to reach the side receiver even at 500 feet and below, the main radar's horizon. The return was weak, intermittent, but enough. They had him again. This time they didn't fire immediately. They had something better in mind. At 10:03, a Book M3 received exactly the data it needed. The crew had been waiting for the aircraft to reach a specific point, a small rise overlooking the valley. The MiG would pass there in 90 seconds. They didn't need to search. The S-400 had told them everything. Altitude 500 feet, speed 480 knots, heading 067, arrival in 85 seconds. Automated systems took over with mechanical precision. The 9S-36M radar went from cold to emitting in 3 seconds. Its phased array already pointed exactly where the MiG would appear. This wasn't a random hunt, it was execution. The S-400's computers calculated not only where the target was, but where it would be, considering terrain, fuel, and even pilot psychology. The Ukrainians' predictability and always using the same valley should have been his end. The pilot's radar warning receiver exploded with alarms. Buck acquisition. Maximum signal. Active tracking. He had flown straight into an ambush with maybe 4 seconds before launch. The geometry was perfect for the Russians. He was trapped in a valley, with no room to dive or climb. 2 9M and 317M missiles burst from their tubes, accelerating so fast they broke the sound barrier before clearing the tree line. Each missile weighed 690 Q and could pull 35 G, turns and impossible to outmaneuver. The pilot saw them appear on the missile warning display. Impact in 31 seconds. But the book had something worse. Command guidance until the last second, meaning breaking the lock wouldn't help him. He had one option, and it would hurt. He pulled the stick into his stomach while pushing the throttles forward, trading energy for altitude. The MiG climbed at maximum performance. The G-suit inflated, trying to keep him conscious. The world darkened at the edges as the altimeter rose 2,000 feet. 3,000, 4,000, 4,500 feet. He fired all chaff cartridges, rolled inverted and pulled back, carving a perfect barrel roll as the aluminum strips created a storm on radar. The first missile tried to follow but couldn't maintain the roll rate. It passed 100 meters below. The second predicted where the MiG should be, but the pilot anticipated and applied negative G mid-roll, dropping in the opposite direction. The missile corrected too late, passing 200 meters wide. He had survived, but the maneuver took its toll. Brutal fuel consumption, speed down to 180 knots, nearly stalling, and the book was already reloading. The pilot needed to reach 15,000 feet to release the GBU-39's reload. Would be ready in 45 seconds. He needed 90, he lost the race. The third and fourth missiles launched, but the crew made a mistake. They fired both simultaneously, turning two problems into one. The pilot held course for 12 seconds to allow the GBU-39s to acquire GPS and atmospheric data. At 14 seconds, he released the weapons and dove. The missiles couldn't keep up, pure physics. They shot past, detonating into nothing. But the MiG was weak. Low fuel, poor airspeed. No tricks left. That's when the Su-35S's radar appeared on his detector. The Su-35 had every advantage. Video perfect view of a slow MiG. It locked the target with an Su-35 at 55 km. The missile accelerated to Mach 4. The Ukrainian pilot waited until the last second and did the impossible. He intentionally stalled the aircraft. The nose climbed to 70 degrees. Speed dropped nearly to zero. The R-77 couldn't calculate an intercept on something nearly stationary. It passed 300 meters wide. The MiG fell into a powerless dive, regaining control at 5,000 feet. But now he was easy prey. The Su-35 dove with an R-73. The Ukrainian launched flares, creating a wall of heat that fooled the missile at 50 meters. The Su-35 was nearly out of fuel and had to disengage. The MiG dropped to the deck, racing home. At 10:14 at 50 feet, tracers appeared ahead, a ZSU Shilka. The pilot rolled inverted and flew upside down just meters above the ground. The rounds passed overhead. The Shilka's radar locked onto ground return. The MiG was hit by shrapnel, lost hydraulics, but kept flying. At 10:15, the GBU-39s hit the command post and then the ammo depot, triggering a colossal chain reaction. At 10:17, the pilot crossed back into Ukrainian airspace with nearly zero fuel, a red-lined engine, failing controls. The runway appeared. He lowered the gear manually. The nose gear didn't lock until the last moment. The MiG touched down, bounced, touched again. The nose gear finally locked before scraping the concrete. The engines died. The aircraft rolled to a stop 50 meters from the hangar, leaking, smoking, riddled with holes. But home. See you later.